Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third session of the Hybrid Live Coding Interfaces Workshop 2021 Beyond the Screen. And this session this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you are, is themed around imagination. And to kick us off, I'm just going to read the text that our curator, Kofi, has prepared for us about imagination. If code can be speculative, what would it do? Bring communities together or reframe current thoughts? Imagination isn't just about what we see in our dreams, but the thought process of what we may want to see in our communities, see in ideologies, or reframing the world around us. And I'd just like to also take this moment to say thanks to Kofi for your curation of this event. It's been really amazing to have you involved, and also to co-organizers Shelley Knotts and Alex McLean. We have one more session after this at 3 p.m. UTC, which will be chaired by Shelley, and that is on the theme of play. But right now, I'm going to hand over to Matilda Sutherland, who is coming to us from Australia. Over to you, Matilda.
Cool, thank you. Share my screen. Okay, so today I'm going to be doing a short performance of the Cowgirl manifesto. I'm going to try and keep it to between 10 and 12 minutes so we can talk about it afterwards. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Matilda. That was incredible. I feel so awake now after having experienced that. I think everyone in the chat is hopefully applauding. I'll do my best to fill the sound space with my applause. Wow, and made all the more intense by, I guess is that like your laptop fan as well, whirring away. It was awesome how it kind of like started raising up as the intensity of the piece got up as well. Yeah, that was amazing. Getting lots of claps in the YouTube chat there as well.
Cool.
Yeah, where to begin? So I was just reading back through your the video abstract that you sent through. Thank you for that. And this piece has taken on a very curious journey from being just a poem and a track in the beginning, and then being transformed into a live coding piece. And I'm just wondering if you could kind of tell us a little bit about the history of this piece, how it came about, what twists and turns it's been on its journey, and so on.
Yeah, well, it started as just a poem that I kind of wrote maybe like half an hour about a year ago. And I didn't really, I produced techno as well. And so I just thought it made sense to make a techno song without really understanding like how kind of relevant that was, I guess, to it. And then in like the last few months, I was introduced to like the work of Joanna Chikau, who does similar kind of live coding performances, hacking into the inspector panel. And when I watched her doing that, that really resonated with me. And I kind of realized that that was the way to sort of present the Cowgirl manifesto. Because it really just like embodies the ethos behind the words as well, rather than, I mean, originally I was going to just sort of have it presented as time-based text on a sort of static web page, but it kind of just felt, I don't know, it just didn't represent it as well as doing it this way.
And Alex says in the chat, I'd love to hear about the influence behind this great work. Are there any particular pieces that you were drawing on even sort of before you encountered Joanna's work?
Yeah, definitely. I really am inspired by the performances of Patti Smith. She's a really great influence for me. I also make rock music, so I've always been like a real fan of her and her sort of like frantic improvisations. Who else? The sort of introduction of the techno aspect was really influenced by the Mother Beat by Eris. It's this concept by Eris Drew about sort of like the ritualistic nature of the bass drum. That's where having the sub bass included in that comes in, because it kind of takes you into a trance where you can transcend, I guess. So I'd say Eris and Patti are probably the biggest influences.
Yeah, I really loved the use of a small YouTube window for the sub bass, and I guess the answers may be slightly obvious, but I just wanted to ask, obviously you could have quite feasibly used, Super Collider or even Ableton or something to do this sub, but why is it important to you that it's in a little YouTube window like that?
I suppose a really big part of the Cowgirl manifesto is talking about the mindless adding to there's so much data in the world already. There's already so much content online. I think that's partly why the ephemeral nature of hacking into the inspector panel appeals to me. It's not taking up space online. And similarly, I could totally create bass drum, sure, upload that or play it live, but it's going to use a lot of CPU, which, I mean, you heard my fan. But it's also, yeah, I think that part of the Cowgirl manifesto is wrangling the tools that we already have available to us and repurposing things that are already out there, I suppose. Yeah.
Awesome. And I have to ask, is the phrase Cowgirl Manifesto, is that something that you just came up with for the poem, or like what's behind this title? Because I can't really explain why, but it's just really like quite powerful somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about data wranglers, like the term data wrangling, and then I came across the term of like big data ranches and was really surprised. And like, I mean, I used to like wrangle cattle a little bit. Like I used to kind of, yeah, I drove cattle when I
So
was a kid, and so
you're literally a cowgirl.
yeah, I mean, at times I have been in the past, yeah. So it just felt like it all kind of just fell together really nicely and really resonated. But
Okay.
yeah, it's come
And
together really nice.
are you planning to make more pieces in this sort of fashion?
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't really got plans for more pieces per se, but this is part of a broader project. Like I've made this techno track to go with it that hasn't been released yet, but I'm planning with my friend Alexander, who runs a label here in Melbourne. We're going to do a sort of like a remix blockchain of, we're calling it a remix blockchain, where we're going to pass the song onto 3 remixes, and then they'll pass it on to somebody else each, and then they'll pass it on to somebody else each, and kind of, yeah, having people repurpose the stems, and then they'll have ownership of this new stems, and it's kind of, yeah, trying to rethink how we approach adding to digital media, really, like presenting musical works online.
Amazing.
So that'll be next year. Yeah.
All right. Well, everyone can stay tuned for that. Thank you again, Matilda. That was wonderful.
Great. Thank you.
And next up, we have Serkan Sullivan. And Serkan is coming to us from... Oh, GMT +3 is all I have.
Yeah, Istanbul.
Where are you, Serkan? Istanbul.
Istanbul, Turkey, yeah.
Yeah, mid-morning in Istanbul, Turkey. Okay, over to you, Serkan.
Hello, everyone. I'm a computer programmer and electroacoustic music composer from Istanbul, and today I want to share you my project, work. So I'm just getting it. Oops. Okay. So it will be a little boring after Matilda's performance. I'm worried about that, but it will be okay. So the title of the project is Work, and it's a little wordy title. It's a web-based platform for telematic collaborative electronic music performance, and we will get to there. And I will try to make it in under almost 10 minutes. I start my time watch. Okay. So, what is Work? It's an end-to-end network music platform, and it's an orchestra with software instruments that sits in the browser and waits for the data from musicians. And most important part of it renders the audio in real time on the listener's computer. So there will be no audio sharing between the musicians and the audience, and the remote performers will share their data with the system that will create the sound. And the work is modular, and it can be arranged to work with different scenarios. So there are some few network music tools like the Jacktrip. Jacktrip tries to solve the problem of sharing high quality audio over the network. And there's also another project, Flock. Flock is a web-based collaborative code editor for SuperCollider and for other software tools. And you edit your code on the browser, and this code is distributed to connected peers. And one of the most, let's say, mature project, Utopia. It's a network music library for SuperCollider. It was used primarily on local networks, and it handles the sharing of data and code between peers, and the music is generated on each performance computer individually. But it will require Chatty or Sonobus to hear the other performers. And the final music should reach audience through third-party streaming services like YouTube or Zoom or more complicated tools like Sonobus or Chatty. So what is work and why it's different from those projects? First, it's a web application, runs in browser, and there will be no installation and configuration to hear the music or for the collaborators that uses the work. We'll get to that. I'm skipping that part now. And there's no audio streaming. Audio is generated in the browser. And the sound engine is C Sound, which is very capable of almost doing any type of sound synthesis. So we have the full-fledged sound synthesis engine. And the musicians and audience listen to the music simultaneously because it works in the browser. And musicians control instruments in real time, remotely, and it allows the telematic performance and also listening. So there are three main components of a work system. One is the web application that we hear the sound and where the sound synthesis engine resides. And the remote OSC is an application that I have written to connect the musicians with the web application, and interfaces are the music interfaces that musicians use to generate their own performance parameters. So let's get to web application. Web application with real-time network communication and audio generation capabilities. It consumes OSC messages, open sound control messages, and it communicates with C sound instruments via change-get opcode. And remote OSC sits between the musicians and the web application. It's the Node.js application with server-client architecture, and it distributes the OSC messages among connected peers. And it can be used for one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, and also unidirectional, bidirectional communication. So it's the backbone of the project, and it can be used for other scenarios, and it can be used out of the scope of work. This is how remote OSC really works. So we have the remote OSC client that should be installed on the musician's computer. And the musician's audio application, it can be anything as long as it can produce OSC messages. And we have OSC server that is installed on a publicly available server like the cloud or anywhere that can be easy to reach. And performers create OSC messages, and the server handles the traffic between the performers. So let's say the performer 1 creates a message of let's make the frequency 220. It goes to remote OSC client, and then it is transferred to server, and then server then distributes this message to all connected performers, and the remote OSC client gets the message and sends it to the audio application of each performer. So the idea is, let's say the audio application is Super Collider, then each Super Collider client will produce the sound with the frequency 220 Hertz. And the last component is the interface. It's any tool, device, software system that can end up producing OSC message. It can be a graphical user interface, it can be a live coding, generative algorithms, or sonification. It can be a sensor data that is gathered from anywhere with, let's say, Arduino type devices. And it can be gestural input devices like leaf motion or anything like. So the interface part is almost always up to the musician, and so it will bring us use work in different scenarios. So the possible musical outcomes can be, we can use work for a network ensemble, or we can use work to organize simultaneous physical concerts, or we can use it for live installations, or live electronics with remote instrumentalists. So remote instrumentalists can, we can arrange that the work instrument can consume audio from the acoustic instrumentalist, and then we can remotely process this audio with our own interfaces over the network. So it's how we can use work in the network ensemble, but it will give the idea that how it works and how we can use it for other scenarios too. So we have the interfaces. As I said, it can be anything. And here is the remote OSC part. And those are the work clients that works in the browser. And then we generate audio in each browser. So it's a screenshot. It's a screenshot of my performance at the Brazilian Symposium on Computer Music. So this part is my interface. It's Python code, and I use it for live coding to generate performance data. And this part is where I log my remote OSC output. And this is the web application. This is also a log screen. As you can see, the same message, let's say kph3, received by the web application with the same data, so that I can play this instrument from my computer using remote OSC, and also this is a solo performance, but I can also add other musicians into the system, and they can all use their own addresses to send messages to the work application. So I'm kind of there. Thank you for attention, and I want to brag about this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Serkan. Thanks so much for presenting. Yeah, really interesting piece of work, and fitting into a very specific niche, which I think has not really been attended to so much by existing tools. I just want to ask, what's the timeline of this work been so far, and what do you see as the timeline going forward? Is this something you've spent a long time developing, and what are the next steps for this project?
Well, the first part was the remote OSC, because it was COVID lockdown days, and we need to find some way to make music with Super Collider friends. So one thing was the one idea first it came to my mind, how we can share data between us and produce music on each computer. Pretty much the same music on each computer in musician's computer. So I started working on this, and then the problem. I think my microphone is a little hot. Okay, and one problem is I came up the problem that we need each peers need to have some level of technical competency. So how can we just include others that they do not know anything about Super Collider or C Sound, but they can produce their own interfaces, some brilliant ideas. So the next step will be the use of C Sound's web capabilities, and combining the remote OSC with the musicians with their own interfaces, and the web application that produces the sound. And for the future, well, I would like to start an ensemble based on this. This is something I hope, but it's also easy to make some web-based installations with this. I can easily connect a data source that is producing real-time data with this system, or I can perform real-time with this system. And since it's a web-based and it's also working in the mobile web browsers, so it brings other possibilities that people in the field, let's say, I'm also making field recordings and soundscape-based compositions. So I'm thinking about making performances that people would listen to at a location. So my music and the location and the sound of the locations will intermingle, and it will be a performance, a site-specific performance in that sense.
Amazing. A lot of plans then.
Yeah, too little time and too much plans, but it's not something like Ableton Live that you can install and use. So it's kind of raw, let's say, software that you can manipulate it to fit in your needs. So I'm thinking about overdoing manipulating it in the next couple of months.
Great. And I'm afraid we do have a question in the chat from Alex, but I think we're going to have to move on to the next talk. Oh, and another question. But maybe, Serkan, if you go to the YouTube, you can answer those questions in the chat. And then you also have one fan, at least already, in Shelley, who's been using your tool already with her students. So that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you again, Serkan. That was a fantastic presentation.
Okay, thank you.
And next up, we have Andrew Brown with live patching utilities. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Jack. Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Brown. So today I want to introduce to you a library of pure data abstractions, which I'm developing for doing live coding in PD. But before I do that, let me just give a little bit of background. So the theme of this is imagination, and it made me think about, how does that connect with my talk? And it actually connects pretty well, because in a sense, when you think musically in a certain way, you get sort of stuck. And my brain kind of was wired for live coding when I first started live coding a few years back. And so in a sense, I haven't been doing so much of it in recent years, but mainly that's because I haven't had the tools to do it. And I have been using pure data for a while now. So I thought, well, let's develop a set of tools which allow me to operate in that environment in the way which my brain works. So just to give you some background, I'm just going to share my screen. It's going to get a little ugly for a sec. I'm just going to go to full screen. So possibly you can see this article, which is on my screen. So back when I was starting live coding, I was working in a duet with Andrew Sorensen called AA Cell. And in 2007, we published this paper about our approach to live coding. And in it, we outlined the kinds of processes that we were using for our live coding practice. And it's really, my brain has just sort of stayed in this space that this article identifies. So what I wanted to do with this project was to create some tools in pure data, which allowed me to work in the way that Andrew and I have been working for some time in our live coding practice. So I'm just going to switch to PD. Actually, what I might do is I might stop that and reshare my PD window. Actually, no, before I do that, let me just go to, just go back to my desktop. And I'll just jump to my browser. And just so you know, this toolkit, which I'm going to be showing, is up on my, it's a repo on my GitHub site. It's called the Live Coding Toolkit for Pure Data, if you want to search for it and download it. Yeah, this site talks about it. There are only a small number of functions. There's this list here. What is it? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 of them, and 3 of them are just audio and one's MIDI. So there's only really about 4 processes. And we go back to this article, that's pretty much what was outlined in there. So let me just reshare PD. And let's do it. Okay, so hopefully now you can just see a blank PD window. So PD is already a real-time system with a whole bunch of useful functions. So we might just start with a toggle, which we can then connect to a metronome. So timing is just in the normal PD metronome. We're going to use quarter of 120 beats per minute as our timing base. So that is going to get sent to the first of the objects that I've built, which is called, first object's called cycle. Cycling and iteration and rotation appear in all sorts of live coding environments, so it's pretty basic to that. It's going to start with some parameters. And these parameters are pitch, velocity, and duration. Then the question is, well, what do we do with that? So for the minute, I'm just going to send it out via MIDI. And pretty much that's the start of it. A couple of things to do is, at the moment, the pitch is coming out, the velocity is static. I'm just going to connect the velocity up as well to my MIDI output. Move that down out of the way. And so this is just cycling through a list of one note, which is 60. And so we can replace that. So if I make that 60 and 62, and just insert that into the cycle. And so it will cycle around any list, an arbitrary size that you provide. And we can do the same thing if we like for the velocity to make that a little bit more interesting. So, and it's independently cycling around that lot of 3 for the velocity and this lot of 2 for the pitch, and that's the basis for what's going on there. So cycle is pretty fundamental to this library, and as you can see, we can get that going reasonably fast. Another function which is part of this library is random. And I know that there's random already in PD and many other libraries. In the article that I just showed, that Andrew and I wrote a few years back, there's a few different sorts of randomness that we use. Linear randomness, which is normal randomness. Then also Gaussian we use quite a lot, and even a random walk. So this random function does all of those. But right now I'm just going to use a random walk. We'll give it arguments for the starting and the walk range, and then set some boundaries for the highest and lowest pitches that it can use. So when we initiate that random object, you'll see that there are 3 outlets. The left outlet is a linear random outlet, the middle one is a Gaussian, and the right one is a random walk. So it's the random walk that we want for the moment. I'm going to connect that up to the pitch inlet, and I'm going to trigger it from the output of the cycle. And this does the thing you would expect. It's just a chromatic randomness. So one of the things which we might want to do to that is just to quantize it to a scale. And so this brings me to one of the other objects that we have in the library. It's called quant, for quantizing, and you just pass it a pitch class set. So for example, and then if I pass the randomized pitches through the quantize, it'll just do the obvious thing, quantizing them. And then you ask, well, what about some rhythm? Fair enough. So again, we can pass a list. rhythms, something like this, for example, which is everything's based in 16th notes according to my metronome here. So that 0.25 is a quarter of a beat, 16th note. So it'll be 4 16th notes long, then 2 16th notes long, and then 1, and then 1. And that cycles around just like everything else. So that's all good and well. And then in the tradition of all kinds of algorithmic music, what we can do is just, if one thing is good, then 2 of them is even better. Don't need another metronome, so I can just use the same metronome to trigger a second iteration of that. Bring my MIDI down and connect it up. So now we've got 2 doing exactly the same. So let's mix it up a little bit. If I just make a small variation to this rhythmic thing, and they'll go out of sync. And change the range of this one, so eventually it'll work its way up, going higher. One thing which can often happen is that things can get a little out of sync. So the cycle object, the last inlet, if you bang it, will restart it. If I do that to both of them at the same time, get everything back in sync, we can restart as frequently as we want. Okay, so that's all good and well, sending stuff out to MIDI, and of course you can use any MIDI sounds you like, and I've just used a bog standard piano for now. But because PD, of course, is its own sort of audio engine, everyone can do whatever synthesis they like in PD, but I've created a simple monophonic synth so that we can just get started fairly easily with that. So for example, if I grab all of that again and create another instance of that, but this time I'm going to send it out to a synth. And the synth has to go to an output. And I need to start it connected to the metronome. So that's got that going. One of the other inlets in the cycle is a transposition, because that's always pretty handy. So if I put that down 2 octaves, which one of these is transpose? It's that one. And the other audio thing which I've created just to get us started is a basic synthesized drum kit, which allows us to do some pretty straightforward things. connect that to the outlet. Use another cycle. Start with maybe hi-hats. Like that. I'm going to select just the values that I want. Use general MIDI numbers for the basic drums. So that goes out like so. There's 3 drums in the basic drum kit, just kick, snare, and hi-hat. Cycle can go like so. Connect the metronome to it. And then let's make sure we sync everything. I need a better way of doing that, but we'll get there. Then almost done. We'll just pass the list here. For a simple drum pattern. And there endeth my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That was amazing. Fantastic from scratch demo, as Alex just said in the chat. Yeah, amazing. We're doing really well on the performances this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Yeah, I'm really curious about something you said kind of at the beginning relating to our theme of imagination and how this approach that you developed differed from what you'd been doing with Impromptu with Andrew Sorensen, and that this way of working kind of fits your brain better. And I'm just wondering if there's any particular kind of like, features of this way of working that you've developed that kind of could help us understand that.
What I actually meant was, I don't think this fits my brain better. I think this fits my brain the same.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So actually, all of the kinds of processes that Andrew and I were using in Impromptu and are now in XT-Lang that Andrew Sorensen uses and I did use for a while. I've just basically replicated those features for myself in PD, so that I don't have to think differently, so that I can still dream in the way that I have been trained to dream, or I've trained myself to dream around live coding, and now do that in PD. I mean, PD is great because it's real time and it's got lots of features for synthesis and stuff, but it was never really designed as a performance tool in that way. So I'm just sort of adding some of the structures that I think are useful to enhance PD for that kind of live coding practice.
Yeah, it did just strike me as being extremely fluid. I've used PD myself more in the context of making musical instruments in an embedded context with the Bella system. I could imagine combining your tool with that, and that leads me to my next question, which is, have you implemented this as sort of vanilla PD objects, or is there some custom kind of code?
No, nothing custom. This is all pure vanilla PD. Yeah.
Lovely. No, that's really nice. And so I guess having spent time with this system, what even though you're kind of porting the way that you think from other systems to this one, are there still sort of noticeable differences that affect your creative process with this version of these ideas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that I've only really built this in the last couple of months. So I'm still getting used to it and it's probably still got a bunch of bugs which I need to get out. But what I'm So it'll be interesting, I think, to see how it evolves in that sense, Jack. Like, I think you're right that usually these tools start out like old tools, you know, in the Marshall McLuhan sense that new media is also always an imitation of old media. But then over time, you find what its affordances are and the ways in which. So I'm hoping that it will probably take me in a slightly new direction. But I haven't been working with it long enough for that to emerge yet.
Really interesting. And is it at the stage where you're ready to share this with the community, or is it?
Oh, yeah, it's on GitHub. So yeah, go grab it. Yeah, lovely. Absolutely. It'll probably be in pretty rapid update over the next few months. So expect things will break and change, but it's okay.
Wonderful. All right, we're going to have to keep moving because we've had such wonderful expositions of these systems. So thanks again, Andrew, for your presentation. And we'll bring you back in at the end, hopefully, if we still have time. And so we've got 2 presentations left in this session. And the next one is going to be given by Kizzy, who's coming to us from Mumbai. Over to you, Kizzy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Skizzy. I'm speaking from India. So I've mostly been following the algorithm community from afar. I'm a part of the Discord community. I've been making music since 2013, mostly with a mix of hardware. I have an Electribe and I use Reaper as my DAW, and I also use Renoise Tracker. Now, coming to my genres, I mostly make experimental electronic, techno, and some rock in between. Let me just share my screen. So for the past 2 years, my goal has been to make music in JavaScript that sounds as good as the DAW, and the result is bit rhythm. Now, I believe I've reached my goal to about 80%. Some optimizations are left. So let me show the first demo.
I commandeer this stolen money by order of the Peaky Blinders.
So hope there were no audio issues. And coming to what I've done, so basically it's a kitchen sink right now. I'm using Tone.js to get most of the DAW effects and playing the samples. I use a canvas in the background and a code mirror editor in the front. Now, I'm not a VJ, so I just play some simple images. You can also play GIFs. Now, coming to the key features, I'll be covering them in the coming slides. There's plenty of conveniences that I've implemented as a part of my workflow, and there's also a bonus 303. A simple one convenience which I can describe now is samples. You can use any sample from the web, and there's also a small sample browser which has some music radar samples that you can use. So this approach has left me in a bit of a pickle because I'm not exactly coding live, and I'm mostly using music as data. And in that sense, this is quite similar to the demo scene music. They call it executable music there. And what I've done is do a mixture of tracking notation combined with a sequencer notation. So I use the typical x000, x000, x00, that for the 4-on-4 kick, for example. And within square brackets, what I do is I mention volume, I mention delay, I mention pan, and I mention pitch. Now, pitch can be absolute. And this is one of the perks of a text-driven approach to music, I feel, because sometimes you want to note between C and C sharp. I've also come up with a small notation for hexadecimals, something which I had trouble with renoise. In renoise, you have to use hexadecimal, but the arithmetic is a bit tricky. So I've come up with a notation which I'm calling Roma decimals or gypsy decimals. Backtick 0 represents A in hexadecimal, which is 10. So I typically use this for silences. So in the sequencer notation, if I have backtick 0, that means 10 silences. Dot is for note of event. Now, the core of the logic in this app is a very simple loop. And I think this loop can be ported to other programming languages as well. What I have is a set interval. I calculate a tick based on the tempo, and I execute some special functions within the set interval. I always get the latest text from the code mirror and I evaluate it. Now, in case I have an edit mode enabled, I evaluate the old text. There's also a transition function that I described to help edit in the future. For example, if you have some special initializing that you have to do later in the song, you can put it in a transition function and you can run it. Now, coming to making music in a text-driven approach versus an electribe or renoise that I'm so used to, what I feel is one advantage is you can use state, which is you can do a logic like if kick has been hit thrice, always play a crash. Now, this sort of logic is something you can do. This is also similar to pure data's counters, where you can store some global state and run logic based on that. Now, the other state that I use is bars. So given the total duration of the song, what I do is I keep track of the current bar and I trigger transitions. So you can assume that the intro section is over and you're going to the verse section next. The other innovation I feel that I've done is automation. As you know, automation is key to make electronic music. And this is something I have not seen done in other live coding approaches. The Endless Acid Banger project convinced me to model knobs directly. Now, in the Endless Acid Banger project, you had random numbers which go from one end to the other. Whereas here, what I do is I hard-coded the array. In the array, you can see that the values go from 0.5 to 0.8 to 0.4 and so on, and it goes to the end of the array. Now, once it reaches the end, you can either go back if the direction is false, and if the direction, if the direction is true, you go back to the array, and if the direction is false, you stay at the last value. Now, the step with which you increment each value in the knob is 0.01. The other thing that I discovered by doing this in JavaScript is you can use observers for some interesting musical effects. So this is quite similar to banks in pure data, something which I had experience with when I was messing with it on Linux. And I believe you can use observers to encapsulate and trigger internal musical actions. So if you look at the GIF below, this is a chain reaction. And I believe by using observers and timers, effectively, you can do something like this, but musically. In the demo song, the end solo part, I was triggering with the observers. So in many ways, what I felt with going the text route, as opposed to my typical DAW workflow, is code in some sense is the new music sheet for me now. It has improved my workflow in interesting ways. And I believe right now in my system, I've implemented the ability to share the entire track as a URL. This is useful for easy remixes and some quick feedback. Now, open source is a bit tricky because the samples, the ones that I use in the demo, are commercial. But I have created another demo which uses freely available samples. One of the advantages I felt moving from Electribe to JavaScript-based approach is copy-paste, surprisingly, because I can easily copy tracks and sequences from my previous projects. And chunking is something you can say I'm giving it a name. I can give it a function, whatever patterns I have, I can give it a name and a function. So that way I can remember it easily and recall it when I'm doing the song. For prototyping, I feel this is a very useful approach. One thing which I would like to share is the version control aspect, which I would like to develop more in the future. This is something I miss from DOS, where I have to save version 1, version 2, version 3. Now, in my thing, I have just implemented a save file, but once you save it to a directory, I have an automatic watcher script that commits the file automatically. So this, for example, is a diff of the song that I played. So I have multiple versions of it. This way I can go back in history and see where the song was modified, and I can go revert it. Now, the other aspect of the project was literate programming. Now, I was working on this project in 2019 and I picked it up again last year. So when I was looking at my code base, it was all strange to me. And I was already working on another Python-based project. So I think we all face this problem. Context switching between multiple projects is quite messy, and you forget where you were when you were last coding that project. And as open source developers, I think this is a big problem that we face when we look back at our projects. Now, I believe literate programming fixes this problem. Conventionally, when you look at a project, you think in terms of a file, a module, a class, or a function. In literate programming, it is a chunk. And a chunk is something like a feature you can think of. Let's say your app has an exit button. All the code related to the exit button is a chunk. So I treat a chunk as a feature, and the way literate programming can be used is to treat chapters as features. As you know, in literate programming, you're writing the documentation and code at the same time. Now, I believe the Achilles heel of the previous literate programming implementations have been using a declarative approach. You can use a very procedural approach to get literate programming done. As you can see in the code below, I've shared a very, very minimal approach to literate programming. Now, what I've done here is just use triple quotes and Python's format operator to substitute code in documentation. Now, this is an approach that I've done with Jinja and Cog to build a system where you can see all bit rhythm source code as well. And I'm keen on using this approach to all my projects. One advantage of literate programming is you can bookmark your fix me's, bookmarks, bug stories, and inspirations. So I've also shared the source code of the demos within the docs. And I'm also sharing all my music this way so that I can document all my inspirations and notes of music theory or DAWs that I come across. And just to briefly show the documentation. So you can see the source code here. In the getting started section, I share all the demo songs and the source code. And so some limitations that I've come across is mastering is better done in a DAW, and reverb and recording is a bit laggy when it comes to browsers, screen sharing. And I have other projects as well. There's Twixter, where I'm trying to do a piano, which is a color-based piano. I'm also trying to start a newsletter on hard coding so that I can keep track of all the music that I come across. There's also a data flow engine, which I'm trying to re-implement in JavaScript. So yeah, you can support me on Gumroad. And I would like to play one last demo, hopefully.
Skizzy, I'm afraid we are running pretty low on time, I'm afraid. So we're going to have to skip the last
It's
demo.
just 1 minute. It's just 1 minute.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to stop because I need to make sure that Kavita has enough time as well.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah,
so the demo is there on the website. You can check it out.
All right, thank you so much. We have time for one quick question. I'm going to take it from the YouTube, where Girl on Road has asked, what drew you to create a JavaScript instrument as capable as a DAW initially? Were you a coder or a musician first?
So I was a coder first. But my first interface to music was hardware. So I wanted to bring that to JavaScript in some sense.
Very nice. And how has that relationship developed for you over time? Do you see any meaningful distinction between those two anymore?
So for me, editing is better done in text. If I look at the editing for my hardware, it has a bunch of steps where I have to insert a memory card and transfer it. Whereas with a text-based approach, prototyping is much easier. But the quality of the sound is much better in hardware. So I am sort of divided in between the hardware and software. I've sort of hit the sweet point in between, I feel.
Very nice. All right, thanks again. And we'll have to move very swiftly on to our final talk. Kavita Gonçalves will be presenting next. And yeah, I'll just and the screen share. Over to you, Kavita.
Thank you so much. Such amazing work. And this will be a complete shift in gears now with me. I begin by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yagara people, the traditional custodians on the land on which this presentation takes place. I acknowledge all of you, all of your ancestors, and all the decisions that have brought us to this point today. I pay my respect to all elders, past, present, and emerging. I want to take you back to 7th November 2020. I was walking along a bridge in Brisbane after watching a movie about a badass chain-smoking Chinese granny in New York's Chinatown. As I made the long trek home, everything felt a bit dire that day. The pandemic, Trump, borders closed. With little imagination, what could one hope for? 8th November 2020. In the morning, this happened. I, like many of us here today, heaved a huge sigh of relief. Even though nothing had changed, something had. I want to point out that you don't see the whole picture of Times Square, the whole media of this media architecture. There is now a spectrum. Every taxi driver, every nurse, every essential worker, every person at the fringes, every person who has traversed oceans for a good life, all the people who carry the city on their backs and make it living, breathing, and imperfect. This media offers a spectrum, but the city rarely ever tells their story. What if these unheard stories could be told by those unseen on their own terms? To do so, I offer another paradigm of placemaking, that is radical placemaking, and in this case, radical imaginations. In radical placemaking, those who experience exclusions engage in placemaking on a social justice issue with the support of digital tools. The term radical comes from Paulo Freire's radical critical pedagogy, Margaret Ledwith's views on community development, and a radical departure from conventional placemaking processes. As a placemaking tactic, its focus is not making tangible interventions, but instead it is interested in the intangible. Usually, the term placemaking means that institutions or communities engage in uplifting physical spaces such as parks, streets, through physical interventions in order to attract communities or to create places of meaning. In this project, placemaking is ephemeral and ethereal, brief and momentary, visual and experiential. It embeds people's knowledge, memories, cultures, and identity into place through technologies afforded by the mobile phone. It is intangible because there is no physical intervention to public space. Rather, there is the creation of an experience. This experience is created by the marginalized so that the members of the dominant group or mainstream public can undergo an embodiment of othering. The Chatty Bench project is a case of radical placemaking and tackles the issue of social isolation both before and during the pandemic. The project is a collaboration between QUT Design Lab, community organizations Communify and Village Church, and Kelvin Grove Urban Village Principal Body Corporate. Kelvin Grove Urban Village is a new mixed-use development here in the city of Brisbane and includes residential, commercial, educational, and recreational uses. As this is a new community, there were a number of placemaking and community development projects undertaken here. In its current state, Kelvin Grove is a diverse community with people coming from all over the world. Plus, it has affordable housing with people coming from all walks of life. It has a big transient population of students. As there is a constant influx and outflow of people, it becomes difficult for people who live here to build connections with one another and develop social capital. In this process, social isolation was identified as a major social issue in Kelvin Grove. As a first step to building connection, Kate of Communify put a sign of happy to chat on a bench outside Communify premises in Kelvin Grove. It was an attempt to encourage people to speak to each other while they tapped into the Wi-Fi of Communify. This became the inspiration for the Chatty Bench project. The project was imagined as a series of face-to-face workshops where people developed geolocated stories or narratives, with the bench being the nodal point. I must point out that social isolation was identified as an issue way before the pandemic. With the pandemic, the project had to be completely modified to go online. The platforms of Google Classroom, Slack, Zoom, and the virtual environment of Mozilla Hubs were used to deliver the project. 16 storytellers from different parts of the world, such as India, Mongolia, Iran, Vietnam, were part of this project. All were over the age of 18 and predominantly women. They created stories on the impact of the pandemic, their love for dancing, precarious migration journeys, and experiences of domestic violence. And they laid out their stories over the landscape of Kelvin Grove. It's like Pokemon Go, but instead of catching Pokemons, you catch a song, poem, a narrative designed and created by the storyteller. The situated stories were made by the 16 storytellers through a combination of different digital technologies, such as interactive fiction, digital storytelling, and locative media. It was made for the smallest, most accessible and pervasive unit of media contraptions, the smartphone. The Chatty Bench project closed out with a face-to-face exhibition in Kelvin Grove. It was the first time that all the storytellers of the project met. The stories were also experienced by exhibition attendees on their smartphones, armed with headphones, a hat, sunnies, and sports shoes. The storytellers in conversation felt empowered thanks to learning coding, felt heard and listened to, and made sense of their difficult life situations. The ones who experienced the stories said that they had an embodied experience and felt connected to the storytellers. Places of Kelvin Grove had enhanced meanings to both groups. With the end of the Chatty Bench project, there was the what's next question. We wanted to find a way to involve and honor all the people who have been left out in the project due to timing, due to not having digital infrastructure or internet access, or simply didn't have the mind space to participate during a difficult time. All the people who had gone through the strictures and structures of the pandemic. So we went back to the benches. And what came was the Chatty Bench Festival. There are 9 partially painted benches in orange that are now sites of performances in a 4-weekend festival in Coogan Park in Kelvin Grove. The festival started on 13th November. It's currently ongoing, and we have 2 more weekends, the 27th November and 4th December. And the benches are now sites of storytelling, performances, theater, dance, drama, music, artwork on trees, and more. In nearly 2 years of lockdown restrictions, the unseen people, their unseen stories now have a place in Kelvin Grove. But I now wanted to push the boundaries of how and where their stories are seen. What more of an imagination can I offer? This brought about the festival's visual projections project in collaboration with Kofi Oduro, the HLCI workshop curator. Our goal was to simply give space to everyday digital media, music, video, audio, images, the everyday media that everyone makes. We collect them and will then stream them to a channel, mirroring a community radio, but only this time it is a media channel. We then add another layer to the media created. We remix it with live coding, which anyone can contribute it as well. This is an attempt to move beyond the expert for the community to contribute and control the media if they like. A community that codes together, stays together, maybe. We then project the digital media and remix media onto a building in public space. On 6th November, we had our community media workshop where we had 10 to 12 community members join us and create digital media. On 19th November, Kofi ran the Hydra live coding workshop. For the uninitiated, Hydra is a browser-based platform for live coding visuals. In this workshop, we had about 8 to 10 people join and created various complexities of Hydra coding. For those who didn't make the workshops, we also have a form where people can contribute digital media and Hydra creative code. We also offer Hydra live coding tutorials on our website. On the final day of the festival, that is on 4th December, we will project the digital stories of Kelvin Grove onto the building. While we do that, we hope to bring Kelvin Grove community together to break bread, to have a meal, a community dinner under the stars. To project that media onto a wall of a building and remixed with Hydra Live Code, they will now see not an institution, but themselves in places which they don't normally occupy. Over here, the people will see their stories simple and bare. It will ask of them, and it will ask of us, what imaginations are possible? And to close, what new imaginations are now possible? Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kavita. That was a wonderful way to end this session with your reflections on imagination there. We're running so close to the end of the session that I think we should actually just invite everyone in the session to share your videos, and we'll have time for just a couple of minutes of chat. And maybe I'd just like to kick things off by just saying thanks again to all of the presenters. And I just want to point towards a commonality across these projects, well, at least 4 of them were all using the web as a platform in some way, as a way to sort of unleash the imagination. And I wonder if anyone using the web in your work might want to comment on that or ask questions of each other's work. And then also in the case of Andrew, you're using a common background practice of a way you've been imagining with one tool and translating that into another tool as well. So yeah, I just want to open the floor for any comments or questions about each other's work here.
So regarding pure data, it's something that I've been wondering, is the JavaScript observer equal to the pure data bank? I think this is something that I've discovered, but I don't know how to qualify it. The literature describes it as constraint propagation, and I think it is better done in JavaScript than pure data because of the text-based approach. And I wanted to ask Andrew if he has explored this from both a text and a visual perspective.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, so I've done most of my live coding in text-based languages, mainly in Lisp languages. JavaScript's a Lisp, so that all makes sense. But what I've found is that you need to continue to practice that. I was watching Matilda's work, and I can only imagine the work that's involved in making sure that's all in your head and being able to do all that. What I find with visual coding, like patching, is that there's less cognitive load in that regard. I can come back to it from time to time without having to do the daily practice I pretty much did for 10 years when I was doing text-based live coding. So I think you're right that text-based is more flexible, but it also is more demanding on the performer in my experience.
All right, quick question from Alex in the chat for Kavita. He just commented on what you were saying at the end there. A community that codes together stays together, maybe. Cliffhanger. And Alex says he's interested in your feelings about the ambivalence of that statement.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. I think, you know, with this whole idea of coding, there's an entire spectrum of people, right? And I could see like a very far end of the spectrum today amongst all the people, and I'm sitting at this other end, I would say. And then there's this other space over here where there are non-coders. So I think I'm interested in people who don't code, and how do we make this accessible to them? So I guess that's where my ambivalence is, because for me to even understand today what I was watching, it was a little beyond me, and I was just thinking about somebody who doesn't code at all. What would they understand from this? So yeah, it's interesting, and that's, I think, where sometimes I think a lot of my work is. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of surprising that coding or even some sort of basic code literacy isn't taught like in public school systems at all. Like, considering it's so much of what we like consume and interact with is built by it. Yeah, it's quite surprising. You kind of wonder what the intentions are. Like, I don't know what would happen if they did teach coding in school. So possibilities for like innovation, I think, would be like pretty boundless. Yeah. I really liked your project. I think the ethos behind it was really beautiful.
Thank you. I really loved the manifesto as well, and to watch that was just beautiful. And I was like, wow, I have no idea how to do that. Or it's going to take me X amount of time to learn how to do that. So I think that's always very fascinating for me. And I'm always looking for, I guess, shortcuts. And like, I guess I would say like a lot of the people whose work was presented today, I would try to figure out a way to use it and then try to translate that to people who have no clue how to use any of that, or whether they could even see themselves using that. And I guess this is a different kind of imagination that I'm seeing, that I'm experiencing today. It's very different from me being an architect who draws on a paper conceptually, moves it to constructing a building. And this is very, I think, like similar to what you said, very ephemeral and ethereal and can disappear, the lifespan of something like this. So yeah, I think those are some of the questions I myself grapple with. Yeah.
Kavita, I'm also interested in how the Hydra workshops went and who came to them, because I too have spent quite a bit of time trying to build simple systems for people to access and use. And I guess what I showed was the latest of those, which I don't think is super complicated. But I'm interested in what sort of people you were able to attract to those workshops and how they went.
Kofi over here ran the workshop, but the kind of people we attracted, I think, were people who were very familiar with coding. So we had professors in the room, and then there was this entire gap, and then we had people who had never coded before. And I think after an hour, the people who had never coded before quietly disappeared. It was just like the experts left in the room who knew exactly what they were doing and what they were creating. So I think it's, yeah, those were the kind of people in here. And I think when I go back to like the Chatty Bench project, I think sometimes what I try to always remember, like in the project, there were people who don't speak English so well, who expertise is not English. Basically, they speak other languages. And when they have to learn coding, the challenge is that they're learning two languages at the same time. And one is so abstract compared to the other. So I think that was one of the interesting things that I found in that project. How to make this coding language more visible and more understandable to people who don't code at all. Yeah.
That's interesting. Actually, it probably relates to the question that I was asked at the end of like, where would I want to take like the Cowgirl manifesto? And I think because of the crossover with like dance music, I'd be really interested in like doing some sort of live code performance like in the club at 1 a.m. or something, and kind of exposing people to it a bit, because yeah, I think I've shown a couple of people who have no idea about coding, but there's still like an excitement there or something. And I think that people are quite afraid of coding. And I mean, again, if English is your second language, there's so much reason to be quite like standoffish toward it. But yeah, I don't think people need to be so afraid. So
yeah,
So
I think there's a bit of demystifying of it that's required, because, for example, even like in the coding language, something as simple as capitalization and how that can wreck everything is not understood, because to them it's like we've spelt the word out correctly and they don't see the difference between capitalization. So even that, which is so obvious to, I think it wasn't very obvious to me. I had to learn, but yeah, so I think I try to use my learnings when I'm learning itself and try to note that and make that more transparent to other people. Yeah.
I think literate programming can help a great deal in making coding more appealing, because you kind of read the software as a book. So it's a very different approach. And it's you can also write the documentation in any language you like. So that sense, I found, in fact, some of the earliest books in literate programming have covered operating systems, cryptography, and all the advanced things as well. And I think that's the way to go to make code more appealing to everyone.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. And I can catch up with you offline.
Well, I can share my own experience with programming. I started learning programming almost 2 decades ago while I was doing my BA in music technology and for the purpose of music. And I can easily say it was extremely hard to jump in right to C sound to Lisp without having any programming background. But I end up being a computer programmer for earning my life. So then later and later, and when I get back to working with CSUN, Super Collider, and other stuff, now it's extremely easy. I'm not saying I can do amazing stuff in Super Collider, whatnot, but I can say I can easily grab the basics. I can easily follow what's going on the code that I'm looking at. So it takes time to get used to some concepts in computer programming, and if you just start with a niche version like the audio programming or other types of programming, then it's challenging. But when you get used to how a computer program works and what are the data sources, other stuff, then it's the same for every language, whether it's C or Python or C sound. So it needs a basic understanding of the programming, and it takes some time. But then after that, it's really amazing because it gives you a competitive edge. That's something that you can use to build, that you have in your mind, that other people will be very feels it's difficult, but it's like a cheating for you because you know how to do it.
All right. Okay, so with that, I think I'll draw this to a close. I could easily keep asking you all questions all through the rest of my morning, but I know it's also evening in some places where you are, so I'll have to bid you adieu. But thanks again for all these wonderful presentations. It's been a really fantastic session and such a pleasure to see all of your work, and I really hope this it's been a good experience for you as well, and that some discussion can continue online as well. So thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together.
Thank you so
Yep.
much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for
All right.
Bye.
And to everyone watching online, we have one more session. It's coming up at 3 p.m. UTC. It will be chaired by Shelley Knox, and the theme is play. So we'll see you there. All right. Bye, everyone.